Police sealed the file. The evidence was logged. The suspect was named. Everyone believed the truth was settled. Then, a single phone call rang through the homicide unit, and nothing about this case would ever be the same. Before we dive in, if you're drawn to the darkest corners of real investigations, the cases that refuse to stay buried, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with us until the truth surfaces. Because this story doesn't just ask who did it, it asks how justice can go so wrong. On February 9, 1999, a passerby walking through Lincoln Park in Baltimore, Maryland, noticed something unnatural among the winter bare trees. Partially buried in the dirt was the body of an 18-year-old girl. Her name was Hae Min Lee. Hae was a senior at Woodlawn High School. She was known as responsible, going, and focused on her future. She worked part-time, took school seriously, and had plans that extended far beyond graduation. The day she disappeared, January 13, 1999, was supposed to be ordinary. She left school in the afternoon, intending to pick up her younger cousin. She never arrived. For weeks, her family waited. Friends called her pager. Teachers asked questions. Police searched, but with no car, no witnesses, and no clear direction, the case drifted into uncertainty. Until Lincoln Park. The discovery of Hae's body instantly transformed a missing person case into a homicide investigation. Detectives from the Baltimore Police Department descended on the scene. They noted the shallow grave, the lack of personal belongings, and the absence of obvious signs pointing to a stranger attack. From the beginning, investigators believed this was someone Hae knew. The first days after the discovery were frantic. Detectives reconstructed Hae's final known movements. She had been seen at school. She was expected somewhere afterward. Somewhere in between, she vanished. Attention quickly turned to her inner circle friends, classmates, and especially her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed. Adnan was 17 at the time. He and Hae had dated openly at school before breaking up several weeks earlier. By most accounts, the breakup was not dramatic. Friends described them as cordial, even friendly. There were no recorded threats, no restraining orders, no history of violence. At first, Adnan was cooperative. He spoke with police, answered questions, and expressed shock at Hae's death. He told investigators that he couldn't remember exactly what he did after school that day. It wasn't unusual, he said. It had been weeks ago. But in an investigation starving for certainty, that vagueness stood out. Detectives also discovered that Adnan had loaned his car and his cell phone to a friend, Jay Wilds, on the day Hae disappeared. Cell phones were still relatively new in 1999, but police believed call logs could help reconstruct timelines. Jay Wilds soon became central to the case. During interviews, his story changed more than once. Eventually, he told detectives that Adnan had confessed to killing Hae and had shown him the body in the trunk of her car. Jay claimed he helped Adnan dispose of the body in Lincoln Park. It was explosive, a first-hand confession, an accomplice, a clear narrative. Police believed the case was breaking wide open. They recovered Hae's abandoned car weeks later, parked in a residential area. To investigators, this supported Jay's account. The pieces, at least on the surface, seemed to fit. By late February, detectives felt confident enough to make an arrest. Adnan Syed was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder. To police, the case now appeared straightforward. The ex-boyfriend, the alleged confession, the corroborating details. In their view, the mystery was solved. But beneath that confidence, cracks were already forming. Jay's statements were inconsistent. Timelines shifted. Locations changed. Some details only appeared after detectives shared information with him. Cell phone records, initially treated as definitive, were far more complex than they seemed. Still, the investigation pressed forward. Then, buried within the case file, was something that would later send shockwaves through the story. Before Adnan was ever arrested, before Jay Wilds became the cornerstone of the case, Baltimore police received an anonymous phone call. The caller did not give a name, but they gave one crucial detail. They told police to look closely at Adnan Syed. At the time, detectives noted the tip and moved on. They already believed they had their suspect. The call felt like confirmation, not revelation. Years later, that same call would be re-examined under a very different light, because the caller didn't explain how they knew. They didn't say where the information came from, and no one ever identified who made that call or why. Police thought the case was over, but that single phone call was only the beginning. By the time Adnan Said's trial began in early 2000, the narrative felt settled to prosecutors. In their telling, this was a familiar story. A teenage romance ended, jealousy took root, and murder followed. They argued that Adnan, angry over the breakup, strangled Hae Min Lee after school, enlisted Jay Wilds to help, and buried her body in Leakin Park. But inside the courtroom, the case was far less solid than it appeared on paper. The prosecution's case leaned heavily on two pillars: Jay Wilds' testimony and Adnan's cell phone records. Without those, there was little physical evidence tying Adnan to the crime. No DNA, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses placing him with Hae at the time of her disappearance. Jay Wilds took the stand and told the jury that Adnan had shown him Hae's body in the trunk of her car and later enlisted his help to bury her. But under cross-examination, the cracks became visible. Jay admitted that his story had changed multiple times during police interviews. Timelines shifted, locations moved. Key details appeared only after detectives shared information with him. Still, prosecutors argued that inconsistencies were normal, that the core of Jay's story never changed. To them, Jay was not perfect, but he was telling the truth about the most important thing: Adnan's involvement. Then came the cell phone evidence. Prosecutors presented call logs showing calls made on Adnan's phone on the day Hae disappeared. They argued these records corroborated Jay's account, placing Adnan in the areas where Jay said the burial occurred. To the jury, it sounded scientific, precise, objective. But what the jury never fully heard was that the cell phone records came with limitations. Buried in the technical documentation was a disclaimer stating that incoming call location data was unreliable. This mattered because prosecutors relied heavily on incoming calls to place Adnan near Leakin Park. That disclaimer was never clearly explained to the jury. Adnan's defense attorney at the time, Cristina Gutierrez, was an experienced lawyer with a strong reputation. But the defense struggled. Adnan maintained his innocence, saying he could not remember exactly what he did after school that day, a normal gap, he argued, weeks after an ordinary afternoon. There were potential alibi witnesses, including classmates and a track coach who believed Adnan was at practice that afternoon. But their testimony was either limited or never fully developed. The defense did not call every witness who could have supported Adnan's account. As the trial progressed, the emotional weight grew heavier. Hae's family sat in the courtroom, listening as her life was reduced to timelines and phone calls. Jurors were asked to make sense of conflicting stories while facing the undeniable reality that an 18-year-old girl was dead. In February 2000, the jury reached its verdict. Adnan Said was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. For Baltimore police and prosecutors, the case was closed. But outside the courtroom, doubts refused to disappear. Over the years, journalists, legal experts, and eventually millions of listeners would revisit the case. They questioned Jay Wilds' credibility. They scrutinized the cell phone evidence. They asked why no physical evidence connected Adnan to the crime. And they returned, again and again, to that anonymous phone call. The call was logged before Adnan's arrest. The caller had suggested police look closely at him. But records later showed something troubling. Police had information pointing to another possible suspect, someone with a criminal history who had also been connected to Hae. That information was never fully disclosed to the defense. As years passed, Adnan remained in prison, maintaining his innocence. Appeals were filed. Some were denied. Others raised new questions about ineffective assistance of counsel and suppressed evidence. Then, in 2014, everything changed. A podcast called Serial examined the case in painstaking detail. Millions of listeners around the world followed week by week as the evidence was re-examined. The public heard the inconsistencies in Jay's testimony. They learned about the cell phone disclaimer. They questioned whether the timeline actually worked. Pressure mounted. In 2016, Adnan was granted a new trial based on concerns about the reliability of the cell phone evidence and his original legal representation. Prosecutors appealed. Courts reversed decisions. Years passed in legal limbo. But the most shocking development came decades after Hae's death. In 2022, the prosecutors themselves filed a motion to vacate Adnan Syed's conviction. They acknowledged serious problems with the case, including the failure to disclose evidence about alternative suspects. The motion stated that the state no longer had confidence in the integrity of the conviction. Adnan Syed was released from prison after more than 20 years behind bars. Police thought the case was over, but the story was not finished. Because even as Adnan walked free, Hae Min Lee's murder remained officially unsolved. The truth, who killed her, and why, was still out there, hidden behind missed clues, unanswered questions, and that single anonymous phone call that started it all. When Adnan Syed walked out of prison in September 2022, cameras captured a moment that felt definitive relief, disbelief, and the sense that history had shifted. After more than 2 decades behind bars, the man once presented as a certainty was suddenly free. But for investigators, legal experts, and Hae Min Lee's family, freedom did not equal resolution. Almost immediately, the case entered a new and far more complicated phase. The Baltimore State's Attorney's Office announced that the murder investigation was officially active again. Evidence that had been boxed away for years was reopened. New DNA testing was ordered on items recovered from Hae's body, including her shoes, items that had never been tested with modern techniques. When the results came back, they delivered another shock. The DNA did not match Adnan Syed. It also did not match Jay Wiles. For some, this result felt like vindication. For others, it raised a darker question. If neither of the two central figures in the original prosecution could be linked through DNA, then who had killed Hae Min Lee? Prosecutors acknowledged that earlier investigators had failed to disclose critical information. Among the suppressed materials were notes referencing 2 alternative suspects, both known to police at the time, both with histories that warranted closer examination. One of those individuals had allegedly threatened Hae in the past. Another had a pattern of behavior that, years later, seemed impossible to ignore. Yet neither suspect was fully investigated. In 1999, the anonymous phone call returned to the center of the story. Records showed that the caller had urged police to focus on Adnan, but internal notes suggested that investigators may have already been moving in that direction before the call came in. The source of the tip was never identified. Whether it was a genuine lead, a rumor, or something else entirely remains unknown. As the case reopened, it collided with another reality. The law does not move as quickly as public opinion. In 2023, an appellate court ruled that Adnan's conviction should be reinstated, not because new evidence proved his guilt, but because Hae Min Lee's family had not been properly notified during the hearing that vacated the conviction. The decision was procedural, not factual, but its impact was enormous. Adnan returned to legal uncertainty, his status suspended between freedom and the weight of a reinstated conviction. Higher courts reviewed the case again. Legal arguments focused on victims' rights, prosecutorial obligations, and whether justice delayed could ever truly be justice denied. As rulings came down, one truth became unavoidable: the system had failed at multiple points, regardless of where guilt ultimately lay. Through it all, Hae Min Lee's family remained at the center of the storm. For them, the past never reopened, it never closed. Each legal development meant reliving January 13, 1999. Each headline carried the same unbearable absence. They did not get clarity, they did not get certainty, and they did not get answers. Investigators today face a case shaped by lost time. Memories have faded. Witnesses have moved on or passed away. Physical evidence is limited. What remains are records, contradictions, and the knowledge that early decisions may have narrowed the truth before it had a chance to surface. The reopened investigation continues to examine the alternative suspects identified years too late. DNA testing has not stopped, but no new arrests have been made. No definitive narrative has replaced the old one, and that is the most unsettling part. This is not a story with a clean ending. It is a story about how a single phone call can shape an investigation, how assumptions can harden into facts, and how certainty can exist even when the truth is still out of reach. Police once believed this case was finished. They were wrong. More than 25 years after Hae Min Lee disappeared, her killer has not been conclusively identified in a court of law. A young woman lost her life, a teenager lost decades of his, and a city was left with the question that still echoes through every document, every appeal, every reopened box of evidence. What really happened after school that day? If this case shook you, remember there are more stories like this, buried in files that were never meant to be reopened. Stay subscribed, because the next one might be even closer to the truth than anyone is ready to admit.